Before we explore the major biological molecules in detail, it's essential to understand the relationship between monomers and polymers because this concept forms the structural basis of many biomolecules found in living organisms. Monomers are relatively small molecular subunits that act as the fundamental building blocks of larger biological molecules. Through the formation of chemical bonds, these monomers join together to produce more complex structures known as polymers. Polymers are therefore large molecules composed of repeating monomer units arranged in long chains or complex structures. In biological systems, these polymers are incredibly important because they allow organisms to create molecules with specialized structural and functional properties. A useful way to conceptualize this is to think of monomers as individual units of information or material, whereas polymers represent the completed macromolecule formed from the repeated assembly of those units. There are several key examples that are particularly important for A-level biology. Monosaccharides, such as glucose, function as monomers that combine to form polysaccharides like starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Amino acids are monomers that polymerize to form proteins, which are involved in catalysis, transport, signaling, movement, and structural support.
Nucleotides act as the monomers of nucleic acids, joining together to form DNA and RNA, molecules responsible for storing and transmitting genetic information.
Although lipids are not true polymers in the strictest sense, they are still assembled from smaller components, specifically glycerol and fatty acids.
An important point to remember is that these monomers are joined together through condensation reactions where water is removed during bond formation, while hydrolysis reactions break these bonds using water.
So fundamentally, the organization of biological systems relies heavily on the ability of small molecular units to assemble into larger, highly specialized macromolecules. Carbohydrates are organic molecules composed primarily of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they play several essential roles in living organisms.
In biological systems, they are most commonly associated with energy transfer and storage, although they also have important structural functions.
At the most basic level, carbohydrates are built from monomers known as monosaccharides.
These are single sugar molecules and represent the simplest form of carbohydrate.
Common examples include glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose is particularly important because it functions as a major respiratory substrate. In other words, cells break down glucose during respiration in order to release energy for metabolic processes. When two monosaccharides join together, they form a disaccharide through a condensation reaction, sometimes referred to as dehydration synthesis. During this process, a molecule of water is removed as a glycosidic bond forms between the two sugar molecules. Conversely, hydrolysis reactions break these bonds by adding water, separating the disaccharide back into individual monosaccharides. As more monosaccharides join together, large carbohydrate polymers known as polysaccharides are formed. There are three especially important polysaccharides you need to know for A-level biology. First, starch, which functions as an energy storage molecule in plants. Second, glycogen, which serves as the primary energy storage molecule in animals. And third, cellulose, which has a structural role and is a major component of plant cell walls. What's particularly interesting is that despite these carbohydrates having very different biological functions, they are all fundamentally constructed from the same small monomer units.
So overall, carbohydrates demonstrate an important biological principle. Relatively simple molecular building blocks can be assembled into highly specialized structures with very different functions depending on how they are arranged.
Next, we move on to lipids, another major group of biological molecules with extremely important structural and metabolic roles in living organisms. Unlike carbohydrates and proteins, lipids are not true polymers because they are not formed from repeating monomer subunits. However, they are still large, biologically significant molecules essential for survival. One of the defining characteristics of lipids is that they are largely nonpolar molecules. This means they are hydrophobic. In other words, they do not interact well with water and therefore do not dissolve in it.
Instead, lipids dissolve in nonpolar solvents such as ethanol.
Lipids are particularly important because they contain a very high energy content. In fact, triglycerides store considerably more energy per gram than carbohydrates, making them highly efficient molecules for long-term energy storage. Now, there are several important types of lipids you need to know for A-level biology. The first are triglycerides, which are the main storage lipids found in animals. A triglyceride is formed when one glycerol molecule joins to 3 fatty acids through condensation reactions forming ester bonds. Triglycerides are especially useful as energy stores because they are compact, insoluble, and release large amounts of energy when oxidized. The second major type is phospholipids, which are essential components of cell membranes. Phospholipids have a hydrophilic phosphate-containing head and hydrophobic fatty acid tails, allowing them to form the phospholipid bilayer that surrounds cells. We also have steroids, which consist of 4 fused carbon rings.
Examples include cholesterol and steroid hormones.
These molecules play important roles in cell signaling and regulation. Finally, waxes are lipids involved in waterproofing and protection. For example, they help reduce water loss from plant leaves and protect external surfaces. Overall, lipids perform several vital biological functions, including long-term energy storage, membrane formation, protection, insulation, and chemical signaling. So although lipids are not polymers, they remain one of the most functionally diverse and biologically important groups of molecules in living systems. Next, we move on to proteins, which are arguably one of the most functionally diverse and biologically important groups of molecules in living organisms. Proteins are large biological polymers made from monomers known as amino acids.
There are approximately 20 different amino acids used in protein synthesis, and the specific sequence in which these amino acids are arranged ultimately determines the protein's structure and function. Each amino acid contains 4 key components: an amino group, a carboxyl group, a hydrogen atom, and a variable R group, also known as the side chain. It is this R group that differs between amino acids and gives each one its unique chemical properties. Amino acids join together through condensation reactions to form peptide bonds, producing long chains known as polypeptides. During this reaction, water is released as the bond forms. Now, one of the most important concepts in this topic is protein structure. Proteins have 4 levels of structure. The primary structure refers to the specific sequence of amino acids within the polypeptide chain. The secondary structure forms when the chain folds into regular patterns such as alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets stabilized by hydrogen bonding. The tertiary structure describes the overall 3-dimensional shape of a single polypeptide chain formed through interactions between the R groups. And finally, quaternary structure occurs when multiple polypeptide chains combine together to form a fully functional protein such as hemoglobin.
A crucial biological principle to remember is that structure determines function. The precise shape of a protein directly influences what it can do. Proteins, therefore, carry out a huge variety of functions within organisms. Some proteins act as enzymes, catalyzing biochemical reactions. Others provide structural support, such as collagen and keratin. Transport proteins like hemoglobin carry substances throughout the body.
Proteins are also involved in movement through actin and myosin, hormonal signaling through molecules like insulin, and immune defense through antibodies.
Because protein function depends heavily on structure, proteins can become denatured when exposed to high temperatures, extreme pH, alcohol, or heavy metals. Denaturation alters the protein's 3-dimensional shape, causing it to lose its biological function. Importantly, the peptide bonds themselves are not broken during denaturation. It is the interactions responsible for maintaining the higher levels of structure that are disrupted. Overall, proteins demonstrate how incredibly precise molecular organization allows living organisms to perform complex and highly specialized biological functions. Next, we move on to nucleic acids, which are some of the most important information-carrying molecules in all living organisms. Nucleic acids are biological polymers made from monomers known as nucleotides, and their primary role is the storage, transmission, and expression of genetic information. There are 2 major types of nucleic acid that you need to know for A-level biology: DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. Before looking at DNA and RNA individually, it's important to understand the structure of a nucleotide. Each nucleotide consists of 3 components: a phosphate group, a pentose sugar, and a nitrogen-containing organic base. These nucleotides join together through condensation reactions to form long polynucleotide chains. Now, DNA is typically found in the nucleus of eukaryotic cells, although it is also present within mitochondria and chloroplasts. Structurally, DNA forms a double-stranded helix with 2 antiparallel polynucleotide chains held together by hydrogen bonding between complementary bases. The 4 bases found in DNA are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Base pairing occurs in a highly specific way. Adenine pairs with thymine and cytosine pairs with guanine.
This complementary base pairing is essential because it allows DNA to replicate accurately and preserve genetic information across generations.
DNA performs several crucial functions. It stores hereditary information, directs protein synthesis, and ensures genetic continuity during cell division.
RNA, on the other hand, is usually single-stranded and functions primarily in protein synthesis.
Unlike DNA, RNA contains the sugar ribose and uses uracil instead of thymine. There are 3 key forms of RNA involved in protein production. Messenger RNA, or mRNA, carries the genetic code from DNA to ribosomes. Transfer RNA, or tRNA, transports amino acids to the ribosome and matches them to the genetic code. And ribosomal RNA, or rRNA, forms part of the ribosome itself and plays a catalytic role during translation. Next, we move on to ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is often described as the universal energy currency of the cell. ATP is an extremely important molecule because it stores and transfers energy needed for cellular activities. Virtually every energy-dependent process in living organisms relies directly or indirectly on ATP. Structurally, ATP is actually a nucleotide. It consists of 3 main components: adenine, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. The phosphate groups are particularly important because the bonds between them store chemical energy. These are known as high-energy phosphate bonds.
When the terminal phosphate bond is broken through hydrolysis, ATP is converted into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, along with an inorganic phosphate ion, and energy is released. This reaction can be summarized as ATP plus water produces ADP, phosphate, and energy.
The released energy is then immediately used to power cellular processes. ATP is incredibly useful biologically because it releases energy in small, manageable quantities, making it efficient and controllable for the cell.
Now, ATP is required for a huge range of biological activities.
For example, it powers muscle contraction through interactions between actin and myosin. It is essential for active transport where substances are moved across membranes against concentration gradients. ATP is also required for biosynthesis reactions such as protein synthesis and DNA replication. Additionally, it contributes to maintaining body temperature and is heavily involved in processes like cell division and nerve impulse transmission. One important thing to remember is that ATP is not stored in large amounts within cells because it is used very rapidly.
Instead, it is constantly regenerated from ADP and inorganic phosphate.
Most AT in aerobic organisms is produced during respiration inside the mitochondria, although small amounts can also be generated during photosynthesis in plants. This continuous cycle of ATP hydrolysis and resynthesis allows cells to maintain a constant and immediate supply of usable energy. So overall, ATP acts as the direct link between energy-releasing reactions such as respiration and energy-requiring processes within the cell, so making it absolutely essential for life. Next, we move on to water, arguably one of the most biologically important molecules on Earth. Although water appears chemically simple, its unique physical and chemical properties make life possible. In fact, water makes up a very large proportion of most cells and is involved in almost every biological process within living organisms. Water is a polar molecule. This means that electrons are shared unequally within the molecule, giving the oxygen atom a slight negative charge and the hydrogen atom slight positive charges.
Because of this polarity, water molecules form hydrogen bonds with one another.
These hydrogen bonds are responsible for many of water's remarkable properties. One of these properties is its high specific heat capacity. Water can absorb or release large amounts of heat energy without undergoing significant temperature change. This helps stabilize both internal body temperatures and environmental conditions. Water also has a high latent heat of vaporization, meaning a large amount of energy is required to evaporate it. This makes water extremely effective for cooling mechanisms such as sweating in humans and transpiration in plants.
Another important property is cohesion.
Water molecules are strongly attracted to one another through hydrogen bonding, allowing them to maintain continuous columns within xylem vessels during water transport in plants. Closely related to this is adhesion, where water molecules are attracted to other polar surfaces. Together, cohesion and adhesion assist the movement of water against gravity through plants. Water is also an excellent solvent because its polarity allows it to dissolve many ionic and polar substances. This is biologically essential because many metabolic reactions occur in aqueous solution and substances such as ions, glucose, and amino acids must be transported dissolved in water.
Now, water performs several critical functions in organisms. It acts as a transport medium in blood, tissue fluid, lymph, and plant cells.
It functions as a reactant in metabolic reactions, including hydrolysis reactions that break down larger molecules. Water also provides support in plant cells by maintaining turgor pressure within vacuoles. Additionally, it contributes to temperature regulation and acts as a lubricant and protective fluid in areas such as joints, the eyes, and the amniotic fluid surrounding a developing fetus.
So overall, the biological importance of water arises directly from its molecular structure structure and hydrogen bonding.
Without water's unique properties, complex biological systems simply could not function, which is why water is considered absolutely essential for life. Finally, we move on to inorganic ions, small but extremely important substances that are essential for many biological processes in living organisms. Inorganic ions are charged particles that are not carbon-based.
They exist either as positively charged cations or negatively charged anions and are typically dissolved in body fluids and cytoplasm.
Although they are much smaller than biological macromolecules such as proteins or nucleic acids, inorganic ions play critical roles in maintaining normal cellular function and homeostasis. Some common cations include sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium ions, while important anions include chloride, nitrate, phosphate, and sulfate ions. Each ion has specific biological functions. For example, sodium and potassium ions are essential for the generation and transmission of nerve impulses. They help establish electrochemical gradients across cell membranes, allowing neurons to communicate rapidly and efficiently.
Calcium ions are extremely important in muscle contraction and blood clotting, and they also contribute to the strength of bones and teeth through calcium phosphate formation. Magnesium ions activate many enzymes and are important in protein synthesis, while chloride ions help maintain water balance and are involved in the formation of hydrochloric acid in the stomach.
Nitrate ions are especially important in plants because they are used to synthesize amino acids and therefore proteins. Phosphate ions are biologically significant because they form part of ATP, nucleic acids, phospholipids, and bone tissue.
Now, inorganic ions are absorbed into the body through processes such as active transport in the small intestine or through roots in plants.
Once absorbed, they are transported in solution throughout the organism.
An important point to remember is that the concentration of ions must be carefully regulated.
Imbalances or deficiencies can lead to serious physiological problems. For example, calcium deficiency may contribute to weakened bones, while iron deficiency can lead to anemia and reduced oxygen transport.
So overall, although inorganic ions are relatively simple molecules, they are absolutely essential for maintaining cellular activity, metabolic reactions, structural integrity, and physiological coordination within living organisms.
In biology, even the smallest molecules can have enormous importance.
Alright, thinkers, that brings us to the end of today's lesson on biological molecules for AQA A-Level Biology.
I hope this video helped make the topic feel much clearer and easier to revise.
Remember, the goal isn't just to memorize biology, it's to truly understand how these concepts connect together.
If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of the Thinkabelle community so you never miss future lessons, revision videos, and exam tips.
And of course, let me know in the comments what topic you'd like to see next.
Thank you so much for watching, thinkers. Keep studying smart, keep thinking deeper, and keep believing in your potential. I'll see you all in the next video.